Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for joining. Appreciate you spending the next 30 minutes with us as we highlight some of the changes in the policy coming for 2020. I hope everybody is doing well and safe and that this finds themselves healthy. As we kind of get through webinars in a pandemic, we try to change it up just a little bit, and that's because with a little bit of distance, we want to make sure that our other panelists are on. So I mentioned that Brandon and Debbie will be joining me today to discuss some of the changes. So let me start this very adept transition where I kindly reach out to my other managers and say, Debbie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
Absolutely great. And then Brandon, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing great today. Hope you are too.
There we go. And with that very clean transition, let's get into the to the meat of the presentation. Just for everybody's benefit, on your screen, you should have a chat feature in case you have questions that come up that you'd like for us to try to address. In the interest of time, just knowing that we're trying to do a lot of information in a 30-minute time frame, if we do not have enough time to get to your specific question, then we will be happy to follow up and share answers with everybody. And knowing that this is probably not the last conversation that we're going to have on the updates as it gets closer to specific account opportunity and transition. So happy to talk about some enhancements to the policy. Again, this is a filing that has been completed with the states. Many of the states still have this pending for approval. So as you know, most states are file and approve, and we'll start to use the new policy form once that's completed. But we do have some states that have now approved for 7/1 and will be going into action. We've drawn these up at a high level so they can kind of have a broad discussion, and then we'll try to wrap it up at the end. To get us started, though, we wanted to talk about our first enhancement, which just has to deal with our expansion of the definition of an insured. So, Brandon, I'll kick it to you.
Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon. So, one of the things that we've been made aware of and understood is going on in the industry is really an expansion of the number of people that are in the industry that are not necessarily looking for part-time work, but who might view some opportunities in sort of a gig economy type role, whether that's somebody that's in the beginning stages of retirement that's still looking to take on the occasional project, or whether it's a smaller firm that needs to bring on specialized talent for a specific project. What we've done is expand the term insured to include any person who is or becomes leased personnel or contracted personnel. And what that allows is it allows for a firm to retain a specific individual and for that specific individual to have coverage under the policy if they're directly named in a suit. This really speeds up the process of maybe bringing that key person on board, somebody who might have either special connections or special skills, and it allows the firm to bring them on without the process of having to have them listed as an additional insured or a limited additional insured, and allows them to quickly access a broader pool of talent. And so we think that this is a great way to allow firms some flexibility in their hiring practices, and also is a way to sort of reduce the overhead and bureaucratic burden that they have. So a few kind of key selling points that we focus on here as a broker delivering the message is really that it decreases the number of touches that you have to have vis-a-vis us when a firm has that key person that they want to access. It provides broad flexibility both for small firms to scale up and for large firms to scale and for larger firms to be dynamic in their hiring practice. And also, as a broker, it promotes fewer E&Os on your part in the sense of, did you remember to get XYZ person endorsed? Are they endorsed appropriately? What does the language say? So it avoids some of that. One key point is that it only applies to persons, so it doesn't apply to subcontracted LLCs or larger entities like that. From an insured, the selling point of this being part of the coverage is really that it allows them to quickly respond to RFPs, especially if there's a unique individual that they need to bring on board to secure that contract or connect with a client. greater flexibility in talent acquisition in terms of not having to make somebody an employee, and lower pass-through costs in terms of not necessarily maybe having to pick up an additional insurance bill for a small contractor. So what we see is that this should really enable firms to respond quickly. So situations that we see this being useful for a firm would be if they're addressing sort of like a marquee project that they've won where they need to staff up quickly, but they don't know that they're going to need those staffing levels over the long term. So it allows them to go after bigger projects without worrying about the potential for extended overhead for long periods of time. It also allows them to bring on people with key business relationships for short-term projects. So think somebody who's got a great relationship with the Department of Transportation or with a particular school district or a professor that's got certain knowledge. It allows them to bring those key people on who might not be your sort of traditional subcontractor that would carry their own insurance. It also allows you to address sort of a crunch when you have too many employees working too many hours. And as we all know, that can occasionally lead to mistakes. So this is a way to address sort of fluctuations in manpower needs across the industry. So we're excited to see firms use it. We've had some very positive feedback on it so far, and really hope to field some questions about it and see what we can do with it.
Okay, so we're off to a flying start. The next piece that we want to talk about is some enhancements to our rectification coverage. So you may remember in 2014, we introduced rectification coverage, which addressed situations where our insured would be responsible for design and construction at the project location. And a situation, let's say perhaps where there is a foundation issue where the pilings for the foundation are missized by the structural engineer, that comes to our client's insured's knowledge. And since we don't have a claim under the policy, because there's not a third party making a claim for money or damages or services, there's no avenue for reporting that claim. So rectification coverage at a high level provides essentially a first-party pass-through between the insured to the carrier to say, hey, absent an actual claim from a third party, I have a design error that needs to be rectified and would otherwise be covered under the policy. So in our initial offering, our thought was that the limitation on design and construction would overlay with what we were seeing in the construction industry from E&O policies, maybe owner insurance requirements that would dictate some type of rectification coverage under the policy. And we didn't really see that expand very often. And we also, recognized that within the broader eligibility of firms in the program, a small percentage is actually involved with design and construction where they're joint venturing or hiring the contractors. So with the knowledge that as a program, we feel that being involved early in the process and helping to mitigate situations early in the process leads to better results and cost savings to the insured. Our expansion now is essentially we are eliminating the requirement of design and construction in that project and saying that this coverage can apply for any firm that is providing design services on the project. It still provides the other basic coverage, which is its direct damage cost for rectifying that issue. It doesn't cover betterment, overhead expenses, markup, profit, etc. But again, gives another avenue as on a first party for an architect or engineer to bring a situation directly to CNA for review and agreement that the piling issue or whatever the case may be should be rectified and therefore covered as a claim as it would otherwise be under the policy. From the standpoint of how we think that's going to play out, there's actually a couple different things. One is that there's other avenues under a contract that an architect or engineer may have. So for instance, if they have a design bid build contract, there may be something specified to say if that issue, that piling issue comes up and an error comes up, the avenue under the contract for resolving it is to bring it to the owner's attention because they don't have a direct relationship to the contractor, the owner has a separate agreement, et cetera. This doesn't change that dynamic. The purpose of the expansion of coverage separate to continue to address firms that have design and construction exposure, is to give another avenue for design firms not involved with construction to make a claim for rectification against the policy. And again, we're going to see it either come up as a claim later because they need to report it to the owner and the owner then subsequently makes a claim. This could start as a pre-claims assistance conversation and then end up as a rectification claim. Again, our goal is just to make sure that there's a broader bandwidth of opportunity. So as a broker looking at the clients or as a client, these are definitely going to deal probably with firms obviously involved in the design, but also involved in construction administration and also expanding out to firms that are actually involved in construction. But we're excited to extend that opportunity and increase that bandwidth so that we provide greater opportunity for insureds in every service, professional service that they're doing on a project, that there may be availability of this coverage in that particular situation. Okay. We also wanted to provide some clarification of coverages as well.
So
Debbie,
the first, sure, sorry. So the first of two exclusions that have been revised, the first one is faulty workmanship. And basically, it's been revised to allow firms that are doing activities related to their professional services, like drilling, excavation, sampling, and testing, that exclusion no longer applies to those firms doing those type of services as part of providing professional services. So for example, an interior design firm that might provide furniture, fixtures, and equipment, or a geotech firm that would be doing drilling or evacuation, or any type of labs firm that might be doing some soil sampling. These are things that typically those firms are going to do as part of their services. So it makes sense that those would not be excluded under the policy if they're doing any of those things. So it's an expansion to recognize that those firms may be doing those activities and they should be covered while they're doing them.
Yeah, Debbie, one thing that I would add too is just recognizing that under the form over the last few iterations, that faulty workmanship coverage exclusion was only had a significant carve out. Obviously, if the architect or engineer doesn't actually do the construction or installation itself, so the vicarious exposure has always been covered. But we do think as we expand our coverage offerings to specialized consultants, especially like geotechnical engineer, laboratory firms, continue with our interior design program, et cetera, that the additional language and clarification will reiterate the fact that regardless of the industry that you're in or the type of work that you're doing, that that carve out will still be there.
And then the second one, and this is really kind of an exciting one, I think, because we're going into new technology, right, is the transportation carve-back exclusion. So previously, firms that were using tools like the use or operation of an auto, a watercraft, or aircraft while performing professional services, there would be an exclusion. And in the new policy, we've revised it to allow firms that use those tools, auto, watercraft, aircraft, and aircraft especially now with the increased use of drones. So in the context of providing professional services, we recognize and allow for those firms using those tools to be covered under the policy now.
Thanks, Debbie. It was funny, I was talking to a broker last week as well, and they called this the Dr. Seuss of exclusions. It's kind of like you can provide professional services in a car, in a boat, on a train,
right,
et cetera. But just to reiterate on this one, this has always been, this is not an exclusion that's been utilized, to remove coverage for like drone coverage or other aspects. But what ended up happening is the FAA several years ago defined drone as an unmanned aircraft, and the exclusion as it was drafted prior to this had unmanned aircraft in this in this carve-outer piece. So since there was a linkage there, you know, as Debbie would say, we looked at it more broadly to say, hey, you know, obviously we're not excluding the use of drones in the performance of professional services. What about a car? What about a boat, et cetera? So this is really an expansion to reaffirm that the means by which you provide your professional services is not a basis for exclusion, and hope that that will give you greater clarity in working with your clients and prospects. Thanks, Debbie. So last piece of the puzzle that we also wanted to kind of highlight has to deal with some changes in our conditions, and also an additional endorsement that's available that I think will help clients with management of contracts and contract reviews. So Brandon, if you could take that away, that'd be great.
Yeah, so one consistent request that we get is to expand the waiver of subrogation, usually in instances where our insured is either a sub to a larger entity, or where there may be a request to add a waiver of subrogation in favor of a contractor. So the way the policy is written right now, the waiver of subrogation applies to the owner and to the insured's client, to the extent that there's a written contract in place requiring the waiver of subrogation. So what we've done in this instance has said that the waiver is going to apply against any person or organization to the extent that prior to the wrongful act, they agreed to waive such rights. So really that sort of is a catch-all to allow the waiver of subrogation to apply to anyone. So again, this is something that should reduce the sort of back and forth that has to happen between the brokers and the carrier, and also allows you to more confidently tell your client that yes, that waiver of subrogation in the contract you signed is going to be honored by the carrier. So we just see it as a way that's going to allow business to proceed more smoothly for everybody. The second one is an addition of most favorable jurisdiction language to the punitive damages recovery. So we're saying the enforceability of the foregoing shall be governed by the law applicable in the jurisdiction which most favors coverage. So in this instance, if there are multiple jurisdictions that might apply to the case, CNA will reimburse the insured on the basis of, hey, you could have gotten these punitive damages covered based on XYZ jurisdiction, so we are going to go ahead and cover those. Punitive damages right now are covered to the extent where they're allowed by law, and this just clarifies what jurisdiction's law we're going to follow in terms of that applicability. This is certainly an edge over some of our competitors, especially the portion about multiplied damage. Very often you'll see that any multiplied damage on competitors' forms is not something that is covered, so that this is a further expansion of something that's generally been a plus for the program.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Last piece of the puzzle that we wanted to kind of solve for you is a new endorsement that we're looking to add to the policy. So a few dynamics here. One is, this is a new endorsement, so the availability of it in a particular state is going to coincide with the approval of the 2020 form. In other words, it's not available under a prior form or in a state prior to, obviously, their approval. But it is exciting in the sense that, you know, as part of our expansion and focus on small business, you know, over the past several years, you know, obviously offering first dollar defense coverage as a standard, extending out to zero deductible options for firms, et cetera. But we're looking for ways that firms can purchase coverage at a price point based on their level of risk and how much support or how much risk they want to take in the form of deductible. For smaller firms as well, whether or not they're in our A&E program, our specialty consultants, landscape architects, land surveyors, or environmental consultant program, for firms under $1 million, we're looking to add another endorsement to the policy that will provide another avenue of management. So recognizing that contractual requirements on projects is an important piece, and also knowing that oftentimes these firms are purchasing at a level to meet contractual requirements, but not far beyond that. the likelihood of a large loss or significant loss in 1 year could really affect their ability to maintain coverage or contractual requirements on other projects as well. So we are adding an endorsement for defense outside the list, the limits for firms under $1 million with good loss experience. And that would be an additional option that you as a broker can select for the client. We have two options. One would be at 25% of the per claim limit, primary limit, and also one for 50% of the primary limit. That is available for firms carrying up to $1 million on a per claim aggregate basis. So that would mean at a 25% level, if you carry $1 million, you would have an additional $250,000 for defense expenses only coverage. And separate from your deductible selection, if it's claims expenses only, then that tower under the endorsement of limits for defense expenses would be hit first, and that would allow a firm to protect their underlying standard practice policy limits to manage through those contracts. So obviously, not every firm's going to want that, but we are looking again to expand bandwidth and availability of coverage, and also, regardless of if this is a prospect for you or a pipeline account for you, and they're with a market that does offer that coverage, this is another opportunity for us to be able to match specifically apples to apples with that program for comparison as well. So as we move forward, you can ask your underwriter about this. There will be opportunities on the application to select it, and then as your state approves that option too, we'll be sending you more updates as well. So we're, again, very excited. This isn't part of the insuring agreement necessarily, but again, we think it's a great option for small firms to be able to manage their elements effectively. So again, at a high level, those are the changes on the policy. For a change, we as underwriters have managed our time effectively, that we still have a few minutes left. And so with that, I wanted to turn a couple of questions to Brandon and Debbie. And Brandon, if it's all right, I'll pick on you first. Knowing that we've talked a lot about several different areas of expansion and the changes and kind of the process that's gone around it, based on your experience, obviously, preparing these coverages, talking to brokers and clients, et cetera, if as a broker, where do you think a broker should focus a few of the items broadly to firms? What do you think is going to resonate more with the broader design industry?
So I think what's going to resonate the best with the broad industry is going to be what we've added for the gig economy and to address flexibility in hiring practices. That's really something that I think is going to hit strongly among all segments, small, middle, and large, because there are implications for all size firms in terms of access to talent. So I think that's universally one of the things that comes up the most when I'm having conversations with insured firms. So I think from a broker's perspective, it's likely what's going to hit the most. Beyond that, I think really the defense outside the limits, if you're targeting smaller firms, is really going to be a big seller. So looking forward to the impact both of those have on our mutual successes.
That's great. So Brandon, one follow-up question for you as well. There's a couple of questions that have popped up around the same theme, and that is the liberalization clause under the policy. So recognizing that although we have submitted the filing to the state, we have to wait, for the state to approve and then define the date, the effective date of the first policy going forward, that you can add this coverage and issue a policy with those coverages. Could you expand a little bit for folks on liberalization coverage within the form and how that will apply as states approve?
Sure. So as states approve, any claim made after the date that the state approved the filing effective, so generally that's a date forward from the day they actually tell us they're approving it, any claim subsequent to that is going to have the enhanced coverage applied to it. So there isn't going to be any need to have us cancel and rewrite policies to get the enhanced coverage. It'll automatically apply to a claim made after that date. So in that respect, even if we've quoted something before the effective date of the new form in that state, you should still be able to apprise your clients of the benefits of the new form.
Perfect, thanks. And for brokers listening in, that was a big sigh of relief on the underwriting side, so that we didn't have an avalanche of cancel rewrite requests as your state approves the filing. So obviously that's something that we wanted to have in place so that any insured would have the benefit of the broader coverage as soon as the state approves and says that you can start to manage claims, utilizing those expanded coverage. Thanks, Brandon. I got one additional question I just wanted to loop back on, and I'll just make a comment, and then Brandon, since you talked about the expansion of insured, I'll let you fill in the gaps. But there was a couple of questions just asking about a little bit of surprise at the way to do that, or that's being added. So just wanted to clarify that the real focus of why we wanted to do this was we knew that design firms were already operating in this environment. The ability to manage, full-time expenses and benefit costs, and as Brandon pointed out, the ability to adeptly ramp up on a project where you needed to bring more people on, but you knew that it might be short-lived, or you didn't want to bring in full-time costs to be able to do that. And then from a workforce, that gig economy approach is there's just a lot of good design individuals, architects and engineers, that could now be available to you on a specific project, but they don't want to engage on a full-time basis. So this is a nut that we've been trying to crack for a while, but we think that this is a way that we can do it effectively to provide certainty to again, brokers and clients, that as you find the right person, if that right person is as a contracted personnel under your direct supervision and control, that this is just another mechanism of way to solve the problem. And for those that haven't memorized our entire policy, you can see some of those bumps in the road along the way where, whether it was an aging workforce and you would have prior principals and owners retiring, but they had a relationship with a particular client, we had added coverage for retired principal partners and employees working for a specific client as a consultant, as automatic coverage, back in the 90s where you had leased personnel, as you look to third party like manpower organizations to expand. So this is just the next iteration of that piece. Brandon, did I miss anything in that?
Yeah, I think that it's something that's resonating sort of immediately when you bring it up. It might not be something that clients are necessarily talking to you about yet because it hasn't been a condition they thought could be covered. But just last week, I was talking with a larger engineering firm that was saying they'd been approached to do a project where the end client wanted them to hire a professor at this local university who was familiar with some sort of new technology. And they had said, no, they couldn't do that. It hadn't been a question that had bubbled up as high as, to the underwriter. But now this is something that they say, oh, this is great. Now we can pursue this with this professor right away. So it's really, I think, one of those things that's probably under the surface and should have some broad applicability.
That's great. Thank you, Brandon. So Debbie, get ready. You're on deck. The final question and the best question is going to be for you. So wanted to thank everybody for their time, but the roundabout question, Debbie, is just that there seems to be some good things coming on the coverage side. The question essentially is, are we going to rest on our laurels, or do we have anything in the that we might be able to share a little bit? Don't know if that's a fair question, Debbie, but I'd love for you to take it.
Oh, sure it is. Absolutely. We never rest on our laurels. So besides the policy changes, we're absolutely making changes to our efficiency end-to-end business processes. And that really is around alignment of underwriter to state responsibility. And then also the breaking point threshold of firm revenues. Previously, we were kind of segmented 0 to 500,000, 500,000 up to 5 million, and then 5 million above is large. Well, we found that we didn't have the necessarily the best transition from a small firm going to a mid-size, and with this rate change, we've corrected that, and so the small will no longer be 0 to 500,000. It'll be 0 to 5 million, and we'll have a much smoother transition for the firms. Once they come to us and grow with us, you'll see that it's going to be a much smoother transition for them. So definitely efficiency, as well as alignment of the underwriter to the state responsibility, saying that we're going to work around having specific underwriters for a specific state for both small and mid, which is now the small, and that it's just going to make it much easier, knowing who to go to and answering questions for all those brokers out there.
That's great. Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your time today. I know it was a quick hit of 30 minutes. As far as next steps go, you will get an email follow-up. I did get some additional questions, so we'll follow up with answers on the questions we weren't able to get to today. But our Darcy will, on our marketing side, we'll be sending out an email that will give you a link to the website with a lot of different information. We do have some pieces available to you right now that highlight the changes in more detail, and also single issues. So that comes as a booklet that you can have as a single PDF with all of the changes combined into one document, or you can also break it out into single issues. And you should continue to check back on the website, because as we continue to communicate this, we'll be sharing more information. We are developing some additional risk management information and repurposing some of our risk management guidelines to better address these topics and give you more tools as you talk to your insurance about it. So appreciate you continuing on the journey with us. We're really excited on the changes. The question on your state of whether or not it's approved and when, again, will be available on the website, as that just becomes very interactive as when the state approves, and we'll continue that dialogue. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to any one of us along with your specific state underwriter on a particular account or how your state is being handled right now. Thanks again for everybody's time. Everybody have a great day.